people aren't just sitting in this destruction, like they're doing something. And I think much of my work, whether it's with clothing or looking at where our food comes from and our life as consumers, we can kind of feel like we can't do anything. We have this awareness, and we accept this responsibility of like, yeah, we're connected to this, but awareness without action leads to apathy. So then, like, how are you going to act once you have this knowledge? And the farmers I've met and many of the people I profiled are acting. So they're not sitting around like feeling sorry about the way the world is. They're actively working to make a better world. I think it's possible for all of us to do that, whether we're farmers or not.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about our planet, our communities, and want to take part in building a better future together. Before we introduce today's guest, I have an update for you. Did you know that we've been on a tree planting mission this year? For every new subscriber to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and our newsletter on caremorebebetter.com, we've been planting a tree. Yes, that means up to 4 trees for each of you, but that's okay. Ultimately, our goal is to make the world a little greener. Now, this is through our partnership with forestplanet.org, and they are presently in Africa working to restore mangrove forests. So this is a very big project, and it's something I'm super proud to be affiliated with. Now, we set a goal this year of planting 20,000 trees, and I thought it would take us a while to get there, but by the end of June, we'd already reached it. So now we're approaching the 22,000 mark, and I have a big question for you. I'd love your feedback. Should we be planting more trees and just keep this momentum going, maybe even surpass 40,000 trees this year? Or is it time to pivot to a new Earth First charity, a different one? Let me know by sending me an email to hello@caremorebebetter.com. I really want to hear from you, and I'd love your input. Okay, so today's guest. I am thrilled to introduce you to Kelsey Timmerman. He is a New York Times bestselling author and immersive journalist who brings global issues about all sorts of things into personal focus. He's explored the human stories behind the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat, and the causes that we support. With his latest work, Regenerating Earth, Farmers Working with Nature to Feed Our Future, he takes us straight to the farm, exploring how farmers around the world are working with nature, not against it, to restore our soil, secure our food systems, and inspire a more regenerative future. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, this is not the first time we've touched on this topic, but every time we learn something new. And I have to tell you, I love this book. So, okay, there's my endorsement right as I'm bringing him up. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Hey, Corinna, great to be here.
I'm just so glad to have you. And I have to say, looking at your, where you've been, before we started recording, we were talking about things like scuba diving, a love we both share. And man, you've been around the world. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that origin story. Take our readers on this journey with you from, let's say, these factories in Bangladesh to cacao farms in the Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire, and now regenerative farms in America. What inspired you to turn your lens specifically on farming and regeneration?
Yeah, I think we kind of share a similar background, and I believe that you have a background in anthropology.
Yes, I do. Archaeology, yes.
Yeah, so I studied anthropology in college at Miami of Ohio. I grew up in the monoculture of the Midwest, and I wanted to be the heck out of here as quickly as possible. Although I live here now, so we'll get to that. But I wanted to be out, and I studied anthropology. I was more interested in the cultural anthropology aspect, about how other people lived around the world and saw the world differently than we did. Because I was surrounded by everyone who was basically a white Christian farmer where I grew up. My family, my friends, neighbors, like that's kind of what it was. And in college, I learned about these other people in our places and other religions and other languages, and just found it really fascinating. So I think partly because I grew up surrounded by monocultures, I wanted to go out and see the world. So I saved up money working like a construction job and bought a one-way ticket that went to Hawaii and then to Australia. And then it just ended there. I didn't know where I was going to go next. I'd figure it out. And so that was right after I graduated college. And so I did the backpacker thing, and I started to write about some of my travels. And the first kind of really kind of embedded cultural experience I had was with I was flying to Kathmandu, Nepal, sitting next to a monk who was like, "Where are you staying when you get to Kathmandu?" And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't plan anything. And he's like, "You come stay with me." So I'm like, all right, we'll do that. And he was like the head of this big lamasery, and it was like this really cool, like felt like I was a ethnographer, out there and experiencing this different traditions I had never even imagined before. And so I started to write more about that. I got back. I worked as a scuba instructor, as we talked about a little bit before it started, and I started to write about some of my travels and got published in a Key West City newspaper. And in the beginning, it was a weekly travel column, and it was kind of like me off in the world having adventures, hitchhiking in New Zealand, hiking in this place, all that stuff. And then I knew I could go anywhere in the world and have adventures and meet people who are interesting to talk to. And so I thought, I had this t-shirt that said, "Come with me, my tropical paradise." And it was tattooed from Fantasy Island. I don't know if you remember that show.
I do. I mean, I think we all grew up on this stuff. There wasn't very much on TV back then.
Yeah, the plane, Hervé Villachez was the actor. There's actually a documentary about him. But anyhow, so I decided I would go wherever the shirt was made. It was made in Honduras. And so I went there and had my adventures, went to like the Mosquito Coast and went searching for crocodiles or alligators or crocodiles. I can't remember which one it is, with a U.S. Based scientist, taught an island village to play baseball. And I thought I should at least go where my shirt was made to meet the people who made it. And so I go and I'm waiting outside the factory for the workers to be let out. And I meet a young man who's like my same age. I hadn't thought this through. Like, what am I going to talk to about this person once I meet him? And I think it was really uncomfortable because for the first time in my life, I was kind of hyper aware of my own privilege and my own opportunity. And I was seeing myself through Amilcar's eyes. And that's when this work started to change for me. It became something deeper. Like, what does it mean to live in this world where we have maybe opportunities and privileges that many people in the rest of the world don't? Like the common experience for you, me, many of your listeners is not the common lived experience on planet Earth ever, right? And including modern day. So that led to this to go like, okay, where every day I wear clothes, where are they made? I was going to meet the people. Many of those people were former farmers who had made the journey into the city to work at factories. And so that I went to their countryside to meet their families. And as much as I was trying to escape the rural lifestyle, like I just felt like even there in those places in Cambodia and China, wherever I was, a more of a connection with folks. I felt like I belonged there more. You see the stars at night, and the air was cleaner, and so that led to another project called Where Am I Eating, where I had different places that we import like coffee from Colombia and Dole Banana, Costa Rica, West Africa for cacao, things like that. And then I hung out with those farmers, and so that was kind of the start of where I started to look more at where I was traveling to, and yet where I had escaped. I had escaped the Midwest, right? And there were some similarities there. So I started to into planting more roots in the Midwest, and I started to ask more questions about what life means like for me here. And so that kind of led to a deeper discussion about agriculture.
Yeah, I think a couple of things I just have been processing as you're talking here. One of them is that, getting out into the world and traveling, especially as a young adult, is truly formative. It helps people to understand in a greater capacity how similar we are across cultures, even if we have barriers that may seem like they're daunting, like, oh, they have a completely different religion, a completely different language, they eat different food, they'd consider eating things that I think are gross, they must be much different, right? but that common thread of humanity is there. And one of the things I so appreciate about this ethnographic approach to storytelling, and for those of you that are listening and may not have a background in anthropology, it really just means deep storytelling and getting into the perspective and helping people to understand what it might be like to be in another person's culture or story and life, like how they live. We do this a lot in marketing. I've done ethnographic research and survey research, all sorts of research from a marketing perspective over the years. But also with this background in anthropology, it kind of comes somewhat naturally. I consider it like a graduated interview. Perhaps that's why I have a podcast in a way, right? And this in itself is a privilege to be able to sit here and talk about this and bring these stories to life. How many people can write a book and have it produced by Patagonia Press and then be able to come on a press tour and talk about it, right? It's a remarkable thing, really. And the stories that you're working to tell to help us understand what it might be like to be somebody who's in the Ivory Coast farming for cacao, the stresses on their families and what's normal there. What's normal there is more child labor oriented too. So those sorts of stories kind of come into a different frame of reference. When I was studying anthropology in the 90s, because I got my undergrad degree completed in 98, the perspective then was not to judge a culture from without it. You had to really try to understand it from within. And now I think we're getting more comfortable pointing a finger and judging cultures from the outside and saying, no, out from the outside, saying, no, there's certain things that are just wrong and we can call them out, like female genitalia mutilation and things like that, right? But still, there's value in trying to understand what it's like to live in that world, in those perspectives. And that's one of the things I just love about your work, because
thank you.
You really bring us on a journey.
Yeah, I mean, anthropology taught me empathy. It taught me not to judge other cultures, whether I'm getting served bat in Ivory Coast and like, oh gosh, I guess I'm going to eat some bat, or like rat there. And it was like, they don't normally eat meat. And it's a special occasion that I'm there and that we're eating rat. So like, it really taught me empathy. And there's this idea of participant observation in anthropology where obviously I can't know what it's like to work on a cacao farm or work in bananas, but I can experience it for a day and work alongside people and have that kind of strike up a natural conversation. And so, that's why I really write people-focused stories where I visit, ask a big question, and I travel to meet people who can help me answer that question.
Oh, I love it. I think that's commendable work. Now, Regenerating Earth it's full of human stories, like what we're talking about here. So some are hopeful, some are sobering. Was there one farmer's story that especially moved you or surprised you that you'd like to share today?
Oh boy, there's so many, and I'm sure some other ones will pop up. So I met a young woman named Celestine in Kenya, and I had read about her in a news article that talked about this organization that was not happy with the Gates Foundation's support of kind of industrial agriculture, kind of as a green revolution, 2.0 that's going to take place in Kenya and other parts of Africa. And so she was kind of an anti-green revolution activist / more so a permaculture activist. And so she had learned about permaculture and got excited about it because what it could mean for her community. And so we were going around talking to communities that she'd worked with, like a widows organization where they were managing a community garden together, taking it to market to sell, to raise funds, to help support their medicine and food, and just have the community that comes around with the garden, and sharing practices. Because some of these places now, like the more traditional farming practices have been lost. And so Celestine's kind of helping them remember some of these practices that maybe when they farmed alongside their grandmothers, like that's what they did, diversity of crops and not putting all of your eggs in one basket and using mulching and all that kind of thing. So after we were done meeting some of her projects, she said, would you like to come to my home community and I can show you sanding? And I'm like, I don't know what sanding is, but like she took the time to spend like a couple days with me. Like, okay, I'll go to your home community. So we go there and then we park the car and we're walking past normal fields. And then all of a sudden it looks like the countryside had been bombed. And there was it looked like the Grand Canyon, about the size of, maybe not so grand as Grand Canyon, but size of Central Park in New York City. Just like nothing, just a giant hole. And I'm like, wow, what is happening here? So sand is like, it's one of the biggest traded natural resources in the world, right? And there's a lack of it. And so what has happened, some of these farmers in these communities have adopted the GMO seeds, which require different fertilizer and pesticides and insecticides, and they have to buy those things. So you have these subsistence farmers that are getting loans for these things that often they're not able to pay back. And we had met some of those people earlier. And so people in Celestine's community had seen that they could no longer make a living farming. They had lost faith in the soil to provide life for their families. And they had sold that land to the sanders. And they come in, remove the topsoil, and there's sand underneath that topsoil in this region, and they just start digging. And often the digging is done not by some big heavy equipment. It's done by the farmers in our community that already sold their farms, and the money that they hadn't paid for the sand was now gone, and now they were out there working sanding, which is a really dangerous job because sometimes the sand collapses on people. And so
when you're talking about sand, is this like hard pack, like almost like sandstone, or is it literally sand, like dunes?
It was more like coarse sand, not like fine sand. And so, but it was very much like when they were digging it, putting it on a truck, it was like you could take sand and throw it up in the air and it would like rain down on you, right? It wasn't like sandstone. But it was pretty manually intensive work. And while we're standing there, we met one of our former classmates. That had been his journey, lost faith in the sand. And we're standing there looking out across this absolute degeneration and destruction. And there's these pillars that stand up. It kind of looks like mini versions of Arches National Park. And I'm like, what are those pillars? And Celestine told me those are graves that in this culture, you buried your loved ones for generations around your home. And out of respect, the people digging in the sand did not touch those graves. They dug around them. In some places, there was bone that stuck out or like pieces of clothing. It was just terrible. And in the face of all of this, Celestine could look out at it, turn around, and talk about the work that she was doing to help people have faith in the soil, have faith in the natural cycles and rejoining those and being able to make a life farming. And she had so much hope and like in her face, while in the background was absolute destruction. So it's meeting people like Celestine that I feel made this journey overall hopeful, even though degeneration and regeneration, like destruction and hope, are like kind of holding those things together at the same time.
Now, as you commenced this story about Celestine, you referenced permaculture. Some people listening may not be aware of any differences or similarities between terms like organic farming, permaculture, biodynamic, and regenerative.
Yeah.
Can you help just lay that out so people understand what we're talking about when we throw these terms around?
That's a big question. To me, that the word regenerative agriculture has various meanings. And I see that often when people talk about it, they might mean biodynamic, they might mean permaculture, they might mean regenerative organic, right? So permaculture was founded by, I think, was it Bill Mollison? You might have to help me out here. And it is usually a smaller scale project, more of a dwelling based, where you observe where you live and kind of make a living from the land there. And it breaks down to like caring for the earth, caring for part of this is for you and your life, and also like making sure there's a fair share for all of those parties. So it's this more holistic view. So that's another term your listeners might have heard, like holistic management, which is kind of promoted by Alan Savory. So to me, we're all kind of like juggling these terms. I think they could all kind of be referred to as regenerative under the regenerative agriculture umbrella, or even sustainable agriculture. The terms get a little bit squishy, and that's kind of what I wanted to take on with this book as well. Like, what does it actually mean? I'm hearing this term regenerative agriculture. Oh, it could sequester enough carbon to reverse climate change. That sounds amazing. Well, what does it mean? And as I talk to people, they would ask me, what is your definition for regenerative agriculture? I was like, well, what is yours? So we have to figure out this baseline of where we were in this. So yeah,
there isn't complete agreement. Like, some people say regenerative ag means you are not plowing, right?
Yeah.
Others say it means minimal plowing and that you're doing everything organically and including animals. And then yet others are saying, well, it doesn't require animals, but if you're really farming in a regenerative way, then you're going to have more biodiversity inherently anyway, right? It's about getting all the life into the soil possible. Then you have yet other people saying, I really prefer the term permaculture because to me it feels more holistic and real and circular, and like it is respectful of the land, almost like bringing a spiritual element into it. I mean, we could go on and on about this, but I'm intensely curious about how these words have come to mean something, how they live in people's brains, and really what people understand about regeneration. Because I mean, even in just conducting some basic research as I'm going through the rigors of my PhD process, I've polled some of my friends, what does regeneration mean to you? Have you seen any regenerative organic certified products? Do you recognize this? And I'm amazed at how few have even heard the term, because I live in it in a way.
Yeah.
I hear regenerative agriculture, it like means something to me, and this is how the words get paired together. But I've also had Paul Hawken on the show a couple of times.
Yeah.
And, he redefined in a way what regeneration means to be something much larger than just regen ag. Not to say regen ag is just anything. I mean, it's a very important cog in the wheel of food supply. But if we're thinking about, where we're headed, does it mean for you that it's humane, that it's fair trade? Does it mean for you and for the farmers that you talk to that their vitality is protected and the land is respected? I mean, what are you seeing? How are they defining it differently?
I mean, the people, some of the corporations that are most responsible for the degeneration of our world, the big agrochemical companies, they are using the term regenerative agriculture.
I know they are. Yeah.
And to them, sometimes as I've visited their websites, it's hard to pin down what it even means. Often it can mean just a cover crop, which they also can sell you, the chemical to spray on it to terminate it so you can plant your crop in the spring, right? So that's, I think there is a bit of a battle for the term regenerative. Wendell Berry has a great thought on this, and I can't remember what he called it, but he's seen sustainable agriculture and organic agriculture, and he said if our words mean nothing, what good are they? And he said we should come up with a name for a movement that is like the unnameable movement for the earth and people on it who care about the land, like something that you can't like shrink down because it can just be co-opted once there is a name on that. And I don't know if I feel quite like that. I do feel like I have come to my own definition of regenerative agriculture, which probably isn't too unsimilar to others. And to me, the farmers I met kind of had their own versions, but they often rhymed. There was also a commonality. So I think one thing is different with my project than some of the others that I've seen to look at regenerative agriculture is it looked outside of the United States much more than others. It just seems like my earlier research into regenerative agriculture, it seemed like most of the folks practicing were like white farmers in the Midwest, which go white farmers in the Midwest who are doing things differently. That is awesome. Or that the term regenerative was first uttered by J.I. Rodale, right, of the Rodale Institute. And he's one of the first to kind of use the term but where did he come up with their like way of seeing the world? Well, Sir Albert Howard had gone to India to teach the farmers there how to farm. And in the course of that, he was converted. Like, why am I teaching them? They are teaching me how to farm within the cycles of nature, which is the term and kind of the idea that constantly kind of came up. So there were these indigenous roots to regenerative agriculture that are around the world in our own country, or roots from traditional farmers as well, that I kind of wanted to get at. And whether it was Will Harris, who I'm sure many of your listeners maybe know, who's an awesome guy in Bluffton, Georgia, who's a cattleman in Bluffton, Georgia, who's kind of not just regenerated the land, but his community, or the Arhuaco, the indigenous group in Northern Colombia, who I spent a fair amount of time with. And I wanted to learn about their farming practices. And they were just, okay, sit in the forest and you, Kelsey, get eaten alive by bugs, and, think about and meditate on these things, and, look at your intentions. Like, they had a similar definition. And Will Harris was like, it's working with the cycles of nature. And
he has an audio book. It's a book. It's called A Bold Return to Giving a Damn, which isn't the typical title for a regenerative agriculture book, right?
Yeah.
But it is. And it's his story about being a rancher and doing things and what he feels is a right way after a family that has been farming this way and ranching this way for 30 years.
I mean, way longer than that. I think he's got grandkids on the farm now, and I think that they might be the six
generations. One farm, 6 generations, and the future of food.
Yeah.
He narrates it. He's a great narrator. I really enjoy this.
Will talk all day, and I did for multiple days. I just rode around with Will in his Jeep, and he had his AR-15 propped up. My knee was bumping against it, and there was shell casings on the floor. And I'm like, Will, like, what are you? It's like, do you shoot out the window? What are you shooting at? He's like, anything that doesn't have love in its heart for white oak pastures, So he's such a good dude. And for him, it's been this journey where he took it from his father was the first one to take it from an organism to like an industrial model. The organism required many more people working on the land. But then someone showed up, the chemical salesman, and said, hey, dump this fertilizer on your grass, come back a couple of days, and it was way greener. Like, you can't blame Will's dad or many of my friends and neighbors, grandfathers or fathers, for not, we didn't know what.
They were just trying to do it better. They thought they were doing it better. That's really it.
It looked better, so they didn't know the long-term repercussions of what this would mean, or spraying these chemicals on the land, what it would mean for their own health, the health of their children and grandchildren. And so I don't blame and I don't look down on any farmers who are still farming that way today, because it is a really hard cycle to break for a whole host of reasons. But Will's definition looked very much like the Arhuacos, who are farming mostly by hand, no chemicals, or fair trade and organic by culture. And we basically sat there, what I thought was a forest, and quickly realized it was basically a food forest that they lived in. And they said that man has broken the cycles of nature, and they are working to live with them where they are and spread that knowledge to other cultures. And so there was constantly, whether it's in the Amazon or Colombia, or a farmer that's a neighbor of mine here in Indiana, like, you would see this rhyming to it. And a lot of people kind of quantify like a 4 or 5 or 6 points of what regenerative agriculture is, and normal ones of like biodiversity and a living root in the ground, and incorporating animals, and using fewer chemicals, or no chemicals, right? Everyone has their own definition, or don't plow at all, or plow minimally. And what I would like to add to that, and I feel like what my work will add to it, and the people I've met taught me, is that there's a couple other things. One of them is a belief that humans can be a force of good. That the science fiction movies that say that humans are the the parasite on our planet, they should be eradicated, or Matrix, or name all these different ones where Terminator, like the humans are the problem, they should be eradicated. And maybe early on my environmental perspective was, I think this place would be better without us, right? But we can, as much as we've been a force for bad in many ways, we can be a force of good. And just letting something rewild is eventually going to, the cycles are going to restart and things are going to get back to working. But like, we can be part of this process in a way that makes it happen faster, that also gives meaning and purpose to our lives, and maybe helps us live better, more healthy lives as well.
Well, I love that addition to the term regeneration. It's a hopeful perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, I too, on bad days, and I'll say, I have them sometimes, you read enough climate reports and you're just like,
yeah, the IPCC
we're screwing this up really bad. Like, we're going to hell in a handbasket. We're denying climate change. And now, sadly, over 100 people have died in part of Texas because we failed them. And I put it that way, we failed them.
Yeah.
Either an alert didn't get to the right people the right way. People didn't take it as seriously enough. They thought, oh, this is just going to be another flood. We get floods all the time, without realizing how severe it would be.
Yeah. We never knew it was a 100-year storm. Well, heck, 100-year storms happen every year in my county. You know what I mean? Like, we need to adjust this perspective.
Well, and what was common 30 years ago versus what happens today is completely different too. When I was going to my undergrad at UC Santa Cruz, go banana slugs. We had at the time, the big storms we heard about were El Nino storms or La Nina storms. Now I've had bad rain years in the past few years where we had as many as 13 atmospheric rivers come through the area. I'd never heard the term atmospheric rivers. I'm built on a hillside. I abut an open space preserve. That's downhill of me, right? It's not like I'm sitting in a swamp here, and yet the office I operate from within here is on the lower side of my property. It's downhill from my front yard, and my office flooded 3 storms in a row. And so when you've got a couple inches of standing water in your home in some capacity, you're confronting the realities of a shifting climate in a different way. And we've been in the home since 2009, and this was 2022. So it's like, come on, it's not like 2023, 2024. Now we've had flood abatement projects at home, right? These are all things we've had to get to know and get expert on. Like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to change? What are we going to do differently? Farmers are confronting those same things, and with more severity in a way. In your area, you might have, heck, you have the bluegrass, you have a lot of horses and horse events out there too, but you also have a lot of farmers. I believe there's a fair amount of corn not too far from you.
Yeah, it's mostly corn and soybean where I live. Yeah.
Yeah, and now some of that, sits underwater and starts to rot in the field because they get all the rain all at once, and in some cases too. So how are you seeing these regenerative farmers look at the changing weather? What are they doing to perhaps change their approach and adapt with the changing severe weather challenges?
Yeah, I think some of it gets at one of the last things I forgot to mention previously about kind of my definition of regenerative agriculture is also there's a spiritual connection with the land. And they might not all call it that, but it sure sounds like it to me when they're talking. The Arhuaco, communicate with the mountains. So they have a spiritual connection with the land. The native Hawaiians, see a kalo plant, and that's like a relation of theirs. So there is that connection. But even the farmers here in the Midwest, you hear them talk about this connection that they have. And one farmer told me, I don't think that God has a gender or whatever, it's like here he was like this Catholic, educated guy that's talking about it in this way that I wouldn't expect him to talk about it. And so in the face of these changes and in the face of this destruction, like they're not just panicking about it. They're just not all doom and gloom. about it, they're doing something about it. On their own land. It's good for all of us, but they're doing stuff about it that's helpful for their own land. And just some, like, back to Will Harris, he constantly has living roots in the ground because they're all pastures. And he shares a video online every once in a while. You can see where it's runoff from his, like, I forget how many, like, thousands of acres, and it meets the runoff of like a corn farmer or like a peanut farmer nearby. It's like just a couple hundred acres. And Will's looks like clearer water, right? Like and like tea. And the neighbors looks like chocolate milk, and it's all just soil washing away. So
No, I mean, this is something that John Rulak talks about too. He wrote a longer article that I believe he published on a Medium or Substack called "Make Our Waters Blue Again," or turn our rivers blue again, something to that effect. I've interviewed him on this podcast, and again, I mean, it's about reducing your use of chemicals. It's about preserving your topsoil. And in a recent conversation I had with Tim Cruz, who's over at the Land Institute and doing research with kernza, which is a deep-rooted perennial grain as opposed to a shallow-rooted annual grain. He just said, look, here in our area, there aren't as many farmers that want to go be regenerative organic certified because one of the ways they work with weed abatement is to plow. And they don't want to plow because they don't want to risk any other soil. They're in Kansas. They want to preserve the soil as much as possible. And I mean, I respect that. It's also about connection to land and actually wanting to build land, build the earth, which is something that is harder to do in some of these more prairie environments than you might think, because, the winds get real strong. You might have things like a tornado come through. If you don't have deep roots, what do you have? Yeah. And, that's the reality that we face now.
Yeah. Because so many people have seen the land come back. So many people I met have seen the land come back to life. When you see something come back to life, you're like a believer, right? And like the Maasai in Kenya have largely been at some point forced off their land, or this very communal living that has been divvied up for individual ownership that eventually leads to, instead of taking your cattle and having them together and deciding as a community where you're going to graze them, you are just having your cattle graze on your individual land. And that's not good. And so, right, so our land gets bad, and then they sell it, they move to the city, right? So a guy I met named Dalmas there, who's about my age, I'm in my mid 40s. He, as a kid, remembers this communal living, and he remembers when there were lions and rhinos and giraffes in his community, and now there aren't. The grasses are gone. And so he heard Alan Savory's TED Talk, which many folks might know, of holistic management, of bunching and herding animals and rotating them around. And, animals that also often have been seen as the source of desertification. And maybe that is correct in many cases, but used properly, used in a different way, can be the way to help regenerate that land. And so Dalmas is part of that effort now to do that in his community. And there was a place I visited on the Masai Mara called the Inukishu Conservancy. And it was corn, because everywhere is supposed to be corn around the world for some reason. And they were not making it as corn farmers. And so this family decided to work with a community and have a community herd. And now rivers that once didn't run anymore are now running. Animals that were no longer in this area have come back, and like that's good because they also have like a lot of tourism in this area as well. And the lions are an important part of Maasai culture, so that's like this this reconnecting with this part of their culture, which had been lost because of this decimation. And so people aren't just sitting in this destruction, like they're doing something. And I think. And much of my work, whether it's with clothing or looking at where our food comes from and our life as consumers, we can kind of feel like we can't do anything. We have this awareness, and we accept this responsibility of like, yeah, we're connected to this, but awareness without action leads to apathy. So then, like, how are you going to act once you have this knowledge And the farmers I've met and many of the people I profiled are acting. So they're not sitting around like feeling sorry about the way the world is. They're actively working to make a better world. I think it's possible for all of us to do that, whether we're farmers or not.
I have so much to say, but I'm going to shift to another question that I think connects to a lot of what you're talking about. What do you think most people misunderstand about farming today, especially those who have never stepped foot on a farm? Or perhaps you could approach this another way and talk about what you misunderstood and what changed for you in doing this research.
Yeah. I mean, farming can be really hard work. And if you're not farming industrially, it requires more hands in the soil and eyes and hearts and on the ground. So I think that's one thing that maybe folks don't realize. The economics of farming are tipping out of the farmer's favor, whether it's the farmer here in the United States or around the world. They're being pinched. The price of the value that they get for their commodity corn or soybeans has like really gone down, and the cost of the inputs have gone up. As one of my farm friends put it, the farmers are being farmed, and they are starting to like say this is not good, right? Like they farmers I talked to who didn't even want to be named, like close personal friends of mine who did not want to be named in the book, say things and are like very like politically conservative and would look at like maybe the way I see the world now as kind of hippy dippy, like kind of liberal stuff, right? So having conversations with him, he's like, yeah, there's a part of our farm that we can't farm anymore because the soil is not any good. And I'm like, has your farm gotten better or the soil got better or worse? And he's like, it's gotten worse. I mean, you go out there now, when there's not a crop growing, it's just like sand almost, right? It's just
it's really crumbly, packed dirt kind of.
Yeah, but think of like LeBron James like throwing up the chalk, at the beginning of games, and that's kind of what would happen for a lot of this dirt. And so he recognizes that fact. He also lost his father pretty early on, and at that funeral, whispers of, I think Dad got drenched by that chemical that when the hose blew, and I think this is maybe what happened. This lead is part of that, and many people in our rural communities are having worse health outcomes and also mental health outcomes as they're trying.
Yeah, it's the highest suicide rate for profession is among farmers.
Yeah.
And this is because like often too, people get real pinched. They have a situation where their family has been running a farm for generations and, something happens on the farm. They need to replace a big piece of equipment. They can't get the loan for it, because they've changed how we farm so much to be more of this industrial ag perspective. It's like a piece of farm equipment might be $1 million. It's like big combine harvester, or that big combine harvester is being shared amongst multiple farms. And then something dries up with that contract. And so they don't necessarily know, where the next hit's going to come from. And sometimes it even comes from the government. Like, hey, this funding that you thought you had for making some of this progress on your land to enrich your soil, we're taking that away now.
Or we're in a trade war with China.
Suddenly the inputs that you have.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of people don't realize how tough it is to make a living as a farmer. And the only thing that's helped farmers, the farmers that I went to school with now are multimillionaires because the value of the land has gone up so much, even though it's not as good as it once was, right? But that is like dividing families as well, where someone is passing it on to the next generation. Well, one sibling doesn't want to farm, the one does. So how do you manage that relationship when there's millions of dollars of assets on the table?
You're like, they want to liquidate their share, so to speak, and who's going to buy it up? It's going to be one of the big agro businesses like Cargill or something like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of my farm friends who I was sitting next to in the tractor, and we were planting like Smurf colored soybeans, and I picked up one. I'm like, oh, what is this? Why is it blue? And he's like, don't touch that. It's like coded. It's this seed that's coded. And this is part of the system as well, where the companies, the agrochemical companies that sell them the seed will insure, if you insure your seed, if you're planting with a coating, where if you're planting without a coating, that's called planting naked. And if something happens to that crop early on, they will not insure it. So there's all these like system things that it's hard to break away from. It's a very efficient system, but it's not a very resilient system.
Frankly, that's the first time I've heard of that. So, how do you know it aside from you're living it and doing it? And I mean, to your point, you go on the farms, you see how it's done, and you gain a different part of knowledge that you might never have had access to.
And they can feel attacked too, like, hey, you're the problem. And also we want you to be the answer. Like, we're just trying out here to make a living. This is a way of life I inherited. We're just trying to make a go of it, so I don't have to sell granddad's land and not be the last of one of us to farm this land. And there's some pride, in keeping it going. And it's tough in the, whether it's farm subsidies or, ethanol as a kind of a subsidy. Like, these are the things that prop up the system, and to step away from that system can be really challenging. So I don't hold anything against folks who are in that system. Some of my favorite people are people who are like industrial my family members that are own turkey CAFOs and lots of land and farm corn and soybeans. So the cash crops, so to speak. Yeah. The subsidized crops. These are big challenges, man. Yeah, but there's people there's little sparks that are kind of lighting the way, where, it seems like, how can we push back against some of these largest corporations on earth? Where one of my farm friends, the one I was riding the tractor with, I told you about earlier with the blue seed, he sees a future where the farms are just going to be bigger. There's not going to be any, like, we're talking like 10,000 acres or more. And that most people who work that land in the Midwest is still people who own it or rent it. But he said most people will be just employees. So there'll be even more of a disconnect from the land. You're not just farming the land you're renting it. It's like you're just an employee told to go farm this field and that field. And how can you get to,
here's your job, this is your duty, go do that thing.
Yeah, the industrial system, every relationship many relationships have been broken, and where they've been broken, they're like, here's something we can sell you. Here's a product, here's a service that we can sell you. And this is in many places in our lives, not just agriculture. Many of the relationships that we relied on to help support our own lives, now we pay for, and it's just become accepted as our society. So, but there are people that are pushing against it. I share a story in one chapter about the island of Kauai pushing back against the large agrochemical companies, and because they were growing corn. They were growing corn for research, and they could go 3 seasons of corn because it was Hawaii. And they ask, hey, what are you spraying next to our schools? We just want to know that. Our schools and our hospitals. And why are people having asthmas? And why did everyone faint all at once at the school, or everyone get sick? And the agrochemical companies won't tell them. So they went to kind of their county and started to try to demand those questions. And there was lawsuits and protests, and thousands of people marched, and it was awkward at times, and because you had a family member who worked for agrochemical companies that you were kind of activisting against. And ultimately, though, that the footprint of those companies was halved on the island of Kauai, and they won. And so, like, there's a lot of hope.
I remember watching that in real time. This is recent. Like the last time I was on Kauai, this was hitting the news.
You still can see corn there for sure. And it still seems like a thing that should not be. Like I was in the Amazon, and I saw a field. I have a picture of one, like a farm that's like grain bins, John Deere tractor. Oh, this was like a farm in Indiana. But it wasn't. It was on the edge of the Amazon. It was where the Amazon once was. Like, there should not be corn in the Amazon, the most biodiverse place, on earth. And there should not be corn on the island of Kauai or anywhere in Hawaii. And it was about like maybe 10 years ago now, but it was really to have to see what's happened in the lives of the people who were part of leading that movement or just part of that movement, how they've changed. Some of them become organic farmers, or now they're teaching the next generation how to farm like traditional, like kalo on a kalo loe, as they call it, like a kalo patch. And so like feeding how do we have more food sovereignty and feed ourselves, or someone that ran for government who was part of that movement. And that's what's neat to see. And that's what I mean by like getting active in some of these things. It doesn't take away from your life. It adds to it, like facing these often horrible, facing the monster. At times we build these relationships of love and joy and kindness, and the being there for each other as we face like this traumatic thing that can add to our lives and make the world a better place and more interesting to live in.
Well, this is getting back to this whole idea that humans can have a positive effect on the environment. We can move things in a proper direction, in a direction of being more regenerative, so that we can have a planet that's healthy again and that feeds people without having to have just giant monocropped large fields. The story you tell me of what your farmer friend thinks the future is, with us clocking in to go essentially work on the farm, to me sounds a little bit like a hellscape. So I'm hopeful that we won't end up there. I wonder what gives you hope as you look at the future of farming and our food system, where you might have some of those stories that are a little bit more dystopian. What gives you hope?
Yeah, I think something that gives me hope is just my own experiences of kind of being won over and participating in these relationships of where I live, and that knowing that if other people have experiences like that and get involved, that they'll be won over too, and that there's kind of this growth. I'm not saying that things are getting way better, as if we're just winning the fight here. But so on my property, we live on 20 acres in Indiana, and I share a little bit of these stories, but not a lot of them in the book. I end up getting 4 sheep so I could holistically manage my 4 sheep on our 1 acre out front, which used to get mowed. And I'm like, why is this getting mowed? And I'm like sitting and noticing what this land like wants to be. And it wants to have black walnuts to kind of be the overstory. So I think about the farmer I met in Wisconsin his name is Mark Shepard, and he has 100 acres of basically a food forest. So I'm gonna let the black walnuts grow up and rotate the sheep around. And that helps me learn what is all growing out in our yards and our pastures, and how much poisonous things there are, like poisonous hemlock is out
Hemlock, yeah. I always have to get that down around horses or cows. You just make sure they don't eat it.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, I need to clear out this for my sheep. They'll eat it. Well, a lot of those animals, they just know.
They know not to eat it. Yeah, mm-hmm.
They're smart. They're born with this, and you learn to respect that natural knowledge that some of these animals have. And we got chickens, and they help me stay in touch with when the sun sets, because this time of year it's summertime and the sun doesn't set around here until 10 o'clock. So chickens go to bed late. Sometimes I don't want to stay up that late because they free range during the day and they go in the chicken coop and I shut it up at night. And not just that experience with animals, but then the gardening and get to know the land a little bit more like that. And then one of the there's a guy named Kaina Makua on the island of Kauai, and he's actually getting ready to be in the Apple TV show with Jason Momoa. He's going to play King Kamehameha, which I did not know at this time. I don't think he knew it at the time I was visited. So he's, he some of their traditional practices, and he talks with kids about how their people used to live and helping them remember that. And they talk about, what river do you belong to? And I love this idea of, we talk about what community do you belong to? And it's the same thing, right? This river, we're part of this river's community, and that comes with some responsibilities too, and recognizing that what people did upriver affect us, and what we do affects people downriver. And just being in relationship with this land got lit up me. And I know that when other people have these experiences, or just start to look at the world a little differently, or visit a regenerative farm, which if you go to Regeneration International, they have a farm map that all over the world there's regenerative farms, and there's probably one in the community near you. And I don't know how much they vet those, but if you call them and they're like, say, come on out, it's probably going to be a pretty good farm. And you could just connect and shorten that food distance up a little bit, and hear how they view this world, and learn from them, and feel that passion. It's contagious. Or just having a favorite tree. Like, I have many favorite trees. I don't, Corinna, you probably have a couple favorite trees. Like,
I steward some on my land,
okay,
but I
yeah,
have a favorite tree that I call my friend Maple. She's this
okay,
struggling of a maple tree that is absolutely struggling, that is at this like kind of juxtaposition, and she's grown through the redwoods, but the redwoods are kind of crowding her out. She's
wow,
covered in moss, but somebody took the trouble of cabling her.
wow,
And I'm just like, she's making it. Like every day I go
yeah,
by, I like touch her and I just say, hi, Maple. I just look at the one maple tree in that forest, right?
yeah, wow. I never even knew maples were out there.
Yeah, well, I didn't expect it, but I grew up in Southern Oregon and we had maples on our property and I love them, right? So it just kind of feels strange that one is in the middle of this redwood forest, right on this little seasonal creek that comes through, right? And there's also this big redwood that I kind of touch and say thank you to every day, just because I think it's part of what keeps the small water cycle going in our neighborhood, because it's one of the tallest trees.
Wow, amazing.
And then on my property, I'm on the other side of that ravine and I'm more exposed. It's chaparral, so it's oak, and I've got two big Doug firs on our property. And we have these horned owls who like to come and sit on top of each of our tallest Doug firs and just look out, right, at night. So I feel connected to this place. I feel connected to this land. And I look at myself as a steward of it, as opposed to it being something that I mow down,
Yeah,
So we have invasive bay here. So we're persistently cutting out the bay that tries to take over, so our oak can be healthy. And it's a beautiful space. So I feel very lucky.
yeah. It's kind of becoming part of a place, and with the full acknowledgement that many of us have been uprooted, right? Like, we had many generations have not, like Will Harris is 6 generations. Most of us can't trace where we live back even a single generation, because we've had to move for different opportunities. And so to plant roots and to get to know a place is not like the modern experience for many people that are living today. So how can we start to reconnect with the full knowledge that, the Miami Indians used to live on my homeland, right? And where I live, and they lived there for thousands of years. And they had a much deeper relationship with where I live, one that I can possibly even imagine. And so how do we kind of relearn, and it's that connecting with the place, and being part of it, and looking at it in a way that the Arhuaco in Colombia did or do. They consider where they live to be the heart of the world, and that they were put on earth to take care of this place. And they see what's happening in the rest of the world, and they realize that if something happens bad in the heart of the world, it could cause the whole world to fall to despair. And wouldn't it be great if all of us looked at where we lived with such responsibility? If everywhere that wherever you live, or wherever your listeners live, that you look at that place as like the heart of the world. It's my responsibility to be a force of regeneration, a force of good on this land and in this community, of people, plants, and beings. And I think that's a really good lesson that I have tried to take away with me, where before I looked at Indiana as a place, if I want to go see nature, you go leave, you got to go somewhere, you got to have an adventure in some mountains or the ocean or wherever. And now moving back here, as one of my Arhuaco friends put it, everywhere has the magic, even Indiana, right? So how do we be stewards of where you live?
Well, Kelsey, this echoes so many conversations I've had in my time hosting this show, but it reminds me of the conversation I had with Paul Hawken at the close of our first interview back in September 2021. And he said, get to know where you live, because I guarantee you don't know who lived here before. What was it? what was the earth like before you paved it over? What lived here? What will live here? How could you help that? And really just ask people to ask different questions, to dig in a little deeper. And to partner on to that whole idea, like if you live somewhere and food is grown around you, get to know what's grown around you.
Yeah.
See what you might want to grow yourself. I have a little herb garden. We have a lemon tree and a couple of plum style fruit trees. One that ended up just deciding it wanted to be a shade tree and produces zero fruit. And then the others that produce too much and get laden.
You still can stay here, I guess, right?
Good shade tree. You're doing a good job. My kids like to climb you.
Birds would live in it. So.
Yeah, exactly. We've got a lot of little chickadees and other birds running through our trees constantly. But, each of these things that I've done to get to know the little plot of land that I'm on, because I'm in California and land is a premium. We don't even have an acre, right? You have 20 you're on. It's just a different world here. But I found such value in coming to understand that better. And going to my local farmers markets and focusing on getting more of my food from those regenerative farmers, because there are plenty here in Santa Cruz County.
Even in Indiana, starting to pop up at the farmers market, Regenerative.
Yeah. And frankly, I get my meats from regenerative farmers that are more in your neck of the woods. They ship it to me frozen. But I wanted to be sure that, even given that my family still consumes meat, I'm mostly vegetarian, but I still have it from time to time. I just haven't had red meat in years now. But my family still eats this stuff. So I make sure I get it as responsibly as possible. And I got to tell you, it looks good. It smells good. It's good meat products that are being produced in a more mindful, more responsible, more respectful, more spiritually aligned way. And I think that if we can take this mindset of being a part of it as opposed to separate from it when it comes to nature, just in general, regardless of if we live in inner city or out in the countryside, that we're going to be doing better by our planetary resources in general. In studying sustainability education at Prescott College, one of the terms I've become more familiar with is this idea of the more than human realm, meaning it's beyond me. It's not just us, like to stop looking at everything in such a resource perspective and begin thinking about it as part of a whole. And I think that mindset shift is something that is hopeful, and it can actually bring us more love personally too, because if you love nature, it seems like it loves you back. That's kind of
it's a relationship issue, right?
Yeah.
That many of us have, and it's a relearning, and it's a much bigger question than like, how should I shop, or how how should my life as a consumer be one that just does good. It is like, well, no, okay, that's great. We should look at our lives as consumers, but there's a much bigger thing out there. It's like, how do you see yourself interacting in this world? How are you part of the community that's happening all around us? How are you interacting with the absolute abundance of our world, even though it may not look like it? Like, have you planted a seed, and how magical is that? Like a sunflower seed, tiny little sunflower seed. You plant it, a couple months later, it's taller than me and has 1,000 other seeds. What? Like, how is the world just not covered in sunflowers? But this is everything has this like abundance in it. If we just stop to see it and to work with it and interact with it, and that abundance can take care of us if we take care of it.
And even for those that are afraid that they have a brown thumb and can't grow anything, I will tell you, I just had bird seed that had sunflowers in it, and they will volunteer with just about anything. Like I suddenly I'm like, where did these sunflowers come from?
Yeah.
Well, we're just going to let it grow. We'll see what happens,
Just start to interact with it. Like, we got sheep, and in the wintertime, we would have them on the edge of the woods, and that they would I wouldn't rotate them around because there's no grasses. I just feed them hay. And then we did that for a couple of years. And so I would feed them pumpkins. And I planted pumpkins that I had, like, on our front 1 acre, I had planted like 50 pumpkins. Like, oh, I'll be a real farmer. I'll like plant these pumpkins. I'll sell them. I got like 5 pumpkins. It was hardly. So I gave them to the sheep. I'm a failure as a shepherd because the sheep get out all the time. I'm a failure as a pumpkin farmer because I only produced 5 pumpkins. But then I moved the sheep off of that. And then in the springtime, all these pumpkin plants start, these accidental pumpkin plants. And I grew way more pumpkins by accident than I did on purpose. And so just trying to get involved and realizing that you might not know stuff. And because we've been cut from that knowledge. Someone in our family tree stepped away from the farm, probably for a really good reason. And we're having to relearn. And so who are mentors in your community, or how can you reach out to our online resources that we have today and join this dance that can bring us so much meaning and purpose and wonder.
Wow. Well, I could keep talking to you for hours, and I just want to thank you for spending this time. Thank you for a beautiful book. I think those listening will have gotten a taste of your storytelling style and some of the stories that you tell in Regenerating Earth. I will just say that it's a pleasure to read. And as someone who does research in the regenerative ag space, I mean, it's nice to read a story that tells you a little deeper perspective about a place. I also think that reading about how people are doing things differently in different parts of the world is idea generating, and it feeds a soul. So thank you for this work. Thank you for joining me today.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
What a treat. Kelsey's work does a great job of reminding us that regeneration isn't just about farming. It's about reconnecting with the land, with each other, and with a future that we can all believe in. It's a spiritual journey too. It's a reconnection with that more than human realm. So if you loved today's episode, I encourage you to both pick up a copy of Regenerating Earth, available now from Patagonia Press. And don't forget, we are planting a tree for every new follower on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and caremorebebetter.com. We've already surpassed our 2025 goal, and I really am looking for feedback from you if you think we should just continue on this journey or perhaps pivot to support a different charity. Remember, you can always reach out to me at hello@caremorebebetter.com to share your thoughts about this podcast and also to tell me what charities you'd like us to support. Your feedback truly matters to me, because without you, this thing I do called podcasting wouldn't be the same. Together we can do more. Together we can create a better earth. We can regenerate our climate. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.